Welcome to the 12th lecture of the course on sociological perspectives on modernity. Okay. Till now, we have covered two very important modules of this course, namely thematic preliminaries and sociological modernity. In another 3 lectures, we are going to cover ultra-modernist perspective on modernity. I mean, that is the structuralist case, I mean the structuralist interpretation of critical modernist paradigm in sociology. In this structuralist case, we are going to discuss the works of Lévi-Strauss and Louis Althusser. Somebody may pose this question just as a prefatory remark. I mean, somebody may pose this question that why Louis Althusser? He is a neo-Marxist, he belongs to the critical school, I mean the Frankfurt school, he belongs to the tradition of critical theory. Why Althusser has been, why has Althusser been clubbed under structuralist interpretation of modernity? Precisely because his version, his account, I mean Althusser's account of modernity indicates structural Marxism. In this sense, even Althusser's account of modernity comes under structuralist interpretation of critical modernist paradigm in sociology. Okay? I mean, structuralism, like positivism, okay, is no longer of immediate interest in its own right, and perhaps I will not be attempting too much to provide anything like a comprehensive account of it. Where it is of interest is in a historical perspective, in that it represents one of the most thoroughgoing versions of modernist thinking in sociology. Okay? This is very important. Even if it does not arouse any interest in critical modernism, I mean structuralism does not arouse much interest in critical modernism. Okay. Though it does not arouse any much interest in critical modernism, it represents one of the most thoroughgoing versions of modernist thinking in sociology, and a series of ideas which remain current in, for example, much neo-Marxist as well as post-structuralist thought. This is very important. We will as we move on, we will find that how they have significant implications, not simply for the debates in neo-Marxism, but also post-structuralism. I mean, in this way, structuralism imposes itself on us as a stage in social theory whose effects are still widely felt. Its period of dominance is now long since past, but what remains is very often a social theory which has developed from structuralist approaches, which has defined itself against them and which bears the marks of this encounter. Structuralism's claim to be considered a form to critical modernism, however, is rather more tenuous. Okay. while much structuralism claims to be Marxist, okay, it very often appears more as an incorporation of Marxism into a rather more affirmative form of modernity. Okay. That is why I said it is very difficult to say whether Marx or Engels, they were in favor of European modernity or not. No, it is not like that. I mean, it is very difficult to say whether they were absolutely in favor of European modernity or they absolutely rejected European modernity. It is very difficult to say. But in the case of structuralism, I mean, while much structuralism claims to be Marxist, okay, very often it appears rather more as an incorporation of Marxism into a rather more affirmative form of modernity. Okay. I mean, this is this is particularly evident in the difficulties that the structuralist thought is confronted with in coming to terms with reflexivity, okay, as well as its consequent explicit or implicit flirtation with positivism. Okay. I'll be mostly talking about if you look at it, I mean, I will be mostly talking about Lévi-Strauss and Althusser, who are the best known who are best known strictly structuralist theorists, and can certainly be said to be critical in terms of their political positions and their implications of some of their work, if not always in terms of reflexivity. Okay. I mean, this structuralism intersects, however, with the positivist and functionalist frameworks deriving from Auguste Comte and Émile Durkheim, which leads to Parsonian structural functionalism. Okay. Let me give you if you look at this and how we shall see that there are good reasons for this kind of convergence. Okay. Let me tell you what is this positivism, that supremacy of sciences over non-sciences, that science is distinct from all areas of human activity or creativity because it possesses a method unique to it, that there is only one method common to all sciences irrespective of their subject matter. Then what is that method? That the method of science is the method of induction. Okay. That the hallmark of science lies in the fact that all scientific statements are systematically verifiable, that there must be a dichotomy between fact and value, that observation always leads to theory, but the converse is not true. In other words, theories are observation dependent, whereas observations are theory independent. I mean, there is a unilateral relationship between observation and theory, and so on. We have discussed these things. Okay. Then what is functionalism? I mean, complementarity and reciprocity of roles in the social division of labor. Social change has taken place only because of complementarity and reciprocity of roles and statuses in the social division of labor. Okay. There is cooperation, there is no conflict, okay, in contradistinction with Marxism. Marxism always suggests that no, there is always a class of contradictions. Okay. There are always class conflicts, but whereas functionalism always operates at the level of complementarity and reciprocity of roles in the social division of labor. Okay. And such positivistic and functionalist explanations that we encounter in the works of Comte and Auguste Comte and Emile Durkheim, not only in their works, but which has also led to the Pearsonian structural functionalism. Okay? Suppose Comte's analysis, I mean positivistic analysis, can be explained in terms of the law of stages. I mean how the society has traversed. Now, the society has traversed through 3 stages, namely the theological stage, the metaphysical stage and the positivistic or scientific stage. The theological stage explains change or social, economic, political, cultural, legal, ethical, institutional, ideological changes on the basis of supernatural forces. The metaphysical stage rejects the theological stage by explaining that any social change which has taken place is because of natural forces. I mean change is naturally mediated, whereas positivistic or I mean in the metaphysical stage, why change is naturally mediated? Because human beings always try to contemplate on nature, human beings always depend on nature. Whereas in the positivistic stage or scientific stage, what we have seen that no, human beings not only contemplate on nature, but also know how to master over nature, how to control nature. Okay? That is why we have discussed in the context of Marx that by acting upon nature, human beings not only change nature, but also change the social relationships involved in it. By acting upon nature, human beings not only change nature, but also change themselves. Okay? In the positivistic schema. Okay? That is what Marx used in the context of his materialist method of materialism. Okay? Okay? Now, when we look at this, I mean in materialism in the context of his reflections on the principles of dialectic. Okay? But when we look at these positivistic and functionalist schools deriving from the works of Auguste Comte and Emile Durkheim, suppose for Durkheim, it is very important to understand the rules of sociological method. Okay? And that method again is a positivistic one. That method is again the method of induction. Okay? Whether you look at his works on division of labor in society or mechanical solidarity or organic solidarity or suicide and so on. Okay? That method has always been the positivistic one, the method of induction. Okay? I mean when I talk about mechanical solidarity, organic solidarity, what is solidarity? I mean solidarity is the assemblage of people in the performance of rituals. Okay? This is very important. Okay? I mean and such complementarity and reciprocity of roles in the social division of labor that we generally encounter in Parsons' structural functionalism. Okay. I mean Talcott Parsons. Okay. I mean the entire Chicago school tradition, if you look at this. Okay. In the 1940s, 50s, 60s, especially 1950s and 1960s, this functionalist school became very dominant in the American social sciences, American tradition of social sciences. Okay. I mean whether you look at Parsons' work on the structure of social action or systems theory and so on, I mean within systems theory again pattern variables and so on. you will find that there is a deep impression of Comtean and Durkheimian positivistic and functionalist frameworks. Okay. Okay. I mean, and it is and over time, I mean, in these 12th, 13th, and 14th lectures, we will find we will see that there are good reasons for this kind of convergence, that how structuralism intersects with not only positivism, but also functionalism. Okay. It is worth doing this kind of exercise, that we must be engaged in such intersection of structuralism with positivism on the one hand and functionalism on the other. Okay. I will not be attempting to give a remotely comprehensive account of either Lévi-Strauss or Louis Althusser, who are in any case opposed on a very wide variety of issues, no doubt about it. Okay. Rather, what I am interested in, I am rather more interested in here, I am more interested here only with those elements of their arguments which bear on our themes in this course. What are those themes? What are the central themes of the critical modernist paradigm in sociology? Holism or totality, reflexivity, rationality, and social movements. Okay? I mean, these four central pillars of modernity, these four central philosophical and political foundations of modernity constitute the critical modernist paradigm in sociology. Incidentally, some of the best accounts of structuralism are critics rather than sympathetic expositions. I mean, if somebody wants to live further and go into some more details, even beyond these lectures, okay, in this MOOC course, okay, on sociological perspectives and modernity, okay, you might be interested in the important critique of Louis Althusser by E.P. Thompson in The Poverty of Theory, which I will be discussing later in the course, because when I will be discussing deconstruction of modernity, I mean, when I will be discussing those within deconstruction of modernity, I mean feminism, post-colonialism, and postmodernism. Okay. Now it is, now we can see, I mean, I'm trying to set the stage here to reflect on or to reflect on those elements of their arguments. I mean, whose arguments? I mean, the arguments posed by Lévi-Strauss and Louis Althusser, okay, which bear on our themes, I mean, bear on our central philosophical and political foundations of critical modernist paradigm in sociology in this course. Okay. Now, let us start with holism or totality. I mean, we are trying to look at the works of, we are trying to examine the works of Lévi-Strauss and Louis Althusser through the lenses of these four central philosophical and political foundations of modernity. Okay. In holism or totality, we are trying to see, I mean, we are looking at basically four things, four yeah, three things, 3 to 4 things, that relationalism and the death of the subject or death of the author, difference, okay, functionalism, okay, and what kind of modernity in the context of structuralist interpretation. Okay. Then we will move on to social movements, rationality and reflexivity. And today in this lecture we will try to capture, okay, two very important components within holism, that is, those are one, relationalism and the death of the subject, and difference we will look at. And in the next lecture we will discuss functionalism and what kind of modernity. Okay. When we look at when we look at holism or totality and how the works of Lévi-Strauss and Louis Althusser have contributed immensely to the debates on modernity through the lens of holism or totality. Okay. If you slightly recall, we have made a distinction in previous lectures between methodological individualist approaches, which take the individual as the starting point for social theory, and relational approaches which focus on the relations between individuals. When I say methodological individualist approaches, I refer to Max Weber. Weber treated individuals as primary, not the relationships between individuals. For Weber, individual is the starting point for any kind of social theory. And when I say relational approaches, they focus on the relations between individuals. For example, Marx always said that humanity can always humanity has always been evaluated or examined in its social context, social circumstances, social conditions of labor production. Okay? It is very important. That is why, for example, we have, as we have seen we have seen that in Marx, the relational emphasis derives from a conception of the individual as essentially social in nature, and that in Weber, what is relevant to the sociologist is action that is oriented towards the behavior of others. What kind of action? No, value rational social action, and more importantly goal rational social action, alternatively known as instrumental rationality. Okay. Then what is the commonality that we can find in both in the works of both Marx and Weber? In both cases, whether in the case of Marx or in the case of Weber, structure arises out of social interaction, geared particularly towards labor in Marx and towards meaning in Weber. Then I reiterate this point that as we have seen that in Marx, the relational emphasis derives from a conception of the individual as essentially social in nature, and that in Weber, what is relevant to the sociologist is action that is oriented towards the behavior of others. In both cases, in the case of Marx as well as in the case of Weber, structure arises of social interaction. Okay? That in the case of Marx, humanity is situated, humanity is examined in its social context. Okay? That is why structure arises out of social interaction. What is relevant to the for Weber, what is relevant to the sociologist is action that is oriented towards the behavior of others. There also structure arises out of social interaction, whether it is value rational social action or goal rational social action, alternatively known as instrumental rationality. I mean, in the case of Marx, such structure arises out of social interaction is geared particularly towards labor. Whereas in the case of Weber, structure arises out of social action is geared particularly towards meaning. Okay? Okay? I mean in structuralism, in structuralism, relationship takes off and becomes fully independent. In other words, it is no longer human beings who relate with each other, but the fact of relationship which first creates the social and cultural individual out of an amorphous biological mass. If you look at this, I mean in the case of both Marx and Weber, okay, relationships are forged on the basis of individuals, collectives, groups, communities and so on. On the contrary, in structuralism, relationship takes off and becomes fully independent. It is no longer human beings, it is no longer individual, it is no longer community, it is no longer group, it is no longer collective who relate with each other, but the fact of relationship which first creates the social and cultural individual out of an amorphous biological mass. What does it refer to? What does it imply? Okay? I mean, this is sometimes turned into a statement that we can only know the social, in other words, the relational, and that the individual or human nature are therefore metaphysical concepts in the strict sense of the term, that we cannot know them. Okay? Let me if I say that we can only know the social, not the individual, not the self or human nature, we can only know the social or the relational, how I am related to you, how you are related to me, how I am related to others, how others are related to me. Okay? Only what we can only know the social, in other words the relational, I mean that the individual or human nature are therefore metaphysical concepts in the strict sense that we cannot know them. For example, we cannot know X in her or his unique individual internal experience, even if we believe it exists. Why? Because all we have available to us is our social interaction with her or him, what she says and what she does. This ultra relationalism, in other words, leads to what is known by the slogan of the death of the subject. Okay. I mean let me give you an example. Everybody knows Sachin Tendulkar, everybody knows Sourav Ganguly, everybody knows Virat Kohli, Mahendra Singh Dhoni, everybody knows Pele, Diego Maradona, Messi, Lata Mangeshkar, Shah Rukh Khan, Amir Khan. Okay? If I have to reflect on structuralist interpretation, that actually I do not know Shah Rukh Khan or Amir Khan or Pele, Maradona, Messi, Sachin, Saurav, Virat Kohli. I don't know. I just know, or Lata Mangeshkar. I just know the way Sachin bats, Sachin plays, or Pele used to play, or Maradona used to play, or Messi plays, Lata Mangeshkar, the way Lata Mangeshkar sings. What they say and what they do are real, but I don't know, actually I don't know them. I know them through their performance. I know them through their action. I know them through what they do and what they say. Otherwise, I don't know that person as such, I don't know that individual as such. Okay? I mean, for structuralists, the individual ceases to exist, the individual no longer exists. What exists, that what that particular individual tells us and what that particular individual does. This is a structuralist construal of critical modernist paradigm in sociology. This is very important. Why is it so? Precisely because the way we can, precisely because of the ways in which structuralists argue that we can only know the social, in other words the relational, the other than relational, the other than social cannot be known to us, because I have never interacted with Lata Mangeshkar, I have never interacted with Sachin Ramesh Tendulkar, I have never interacted with Pele or Diego Maradona, I have never interacted with Kapil Dev Nikhanj or Sunil Manohar Gavaskar. Okay? I mean, this is very important to know that, or I have never interacted with the Prime Minister of India, for example. What I know of the Prime Minister of India or the President of India is through what they say and what they do. Okay? That is why in the structuralist case, we can only know the social, in other words the relational, and that the individual or human nature are therefore metaphysical concepts in the strict sense that we cannot know them. That is why I said, for example, we cannot know Lata Mangeshkar in her unique individual internal experience, even if we believe it exists, because all we have available to us, all we have available to us is our social interaction with her, what she says, what she does, how she sings, and so on. I mean, this ultra relationalism, okay, in other words, leads to what is known by the slogan of the death of the subject or the death of the author. Okay. What does it imply? It implies that either the individual literally does not exist, because they are only created by social interaction and form simply an intersection between different social relations, or the individual is methodologically unknowable because we can only know the social. This is interesting. I mean, if I say this ultra relationalism leads to what is known by leads to the death of the subject or death of the author, it implies that either the individual literally does not exist, the individual ceases to exist, because the individuals are only created by social interaction. The individuals form simply an intersection between different social relations. It is the function, it is the functions which assume greater significance than the individual. It is the action which plays a more dominant role than the individual herself or himself. Okay? I mean, this ultra relationalism which leads to the death of the subject or death of the author, okay, leads us into two directions. One may be the individual literally does not exist because the individual is only created by social interaction, and the individual simply forms an interaction between different social relations. Or second option is that the individual is methodologically unknowable, because we can know only the social, in other words the relational. Okay? I mean, methodologically also it is not possible to know the individual. What at most, what to the greatest extent possible, we can just know what the individual says and or what the individual does. Okay. Then the argument that the individual literally does not exist, and that they are only the intersection of social relations or the bearers of social structure, is argued very strongly by Louis Althusser, who sees our belief that we are individuals to be a psychological illusion. Instead, Althusser argues, let me quote Althusser, that the way he said, the category of the subject is the constitutive category of all ideology. That is why our illusory subjectivity generates ideology, and ideology reproduces our illusions of subjectivity. It is very important. That is why if we have to go by what Althusser said, if we have to decode what Althusser is trying to say, okay, that as structuralism argues that the individual does not exist, that the individuals are only the intersection of social relations of production or the bearers of social structure. Okay. I mean, through the lens of Althusser, who sees our belief that we are individuals to be only psychological illusion, mental illusion. The way he argues that the category of the subject is the constitutive category of all ideology. Okay. Whether it is individual or the social relations or relational, human nature, whatever you say, okay, the category of the subject is the constitutive category of all ideology. That is why this is our subjective position. Okay. What Althusser suggests, that it is our subjective position which has created such psychological illusion. That is why our illusory subjectivity, produces ideology, our illusory subjectivity generates ideology, and ideology reproduces our illusions of subjectivity. Okay. Now, let us come to the second important element within holism or totality, that is difference. Now, then we have discussed within holism or totality, we have discussed relationalism and the death of the subject. I mean, we can only know the social, in other words the relational, and that the individual or human nature are therefore metaphysical concepts in the strict sense that we cannot know them. I mean, such ultra relationalism leads to the death of the subject. I mean, either the individual literally does not exist because they are only created by social interaction and form simply an intersection between different social relations, or the individual is methodologically unknowable because we can only know the social. The argument that the individual literally does not exist, that they are only the intersection of social relations or the debates of social structure or the bearers of social structure, is argued very strongly by Althusser, who sees our belief that we are individuals to be a psychological illusion. Instead, he argues the category of the subject is the constitutive category of all our ideology. Our illusory subjectivity generates ideology, and ideology reproduces our illusions of subjectivity. Okay. Now, while examining difference, all that we can know then, or all that exists, is the relational. If all that we can know about is relations, then we can think about the way in which those relations interact with one another in a very detached and even very formalistic approach. We can only try and categorize the different types of relation which are possible, which may be possible. And Weber's 4 types of social action are a move in this direction. What are those? What were those 4 types of social action that we have already discussed? Traditional social action, affective or emotive social action, value rational social action, and goal rational social action. Goal rational social action is also known as instrumental rationality. Okay. Then these different types of relation which are possible. Okay. Further, we have also seen that despite Weber's methodological individualism, we have seen that despite Weber's methodological individualism, the concept of instrumental rationality or goal oriented social action in particular has a tendency to become dominant in his thinking. Okay. That is why, if you slightly recall, we have discussed that how he thought of how he thought that these traditional social action and affective or emotive social action are unreflective in nature, and hence they are meaningless and they do not contribute to meaningful social action. Rather, value rational social action and goal rational social action, they contribute to the domains of or spheres of meaningful social action. Okay. That is why instrumental rationality is very important. Instrumental rationality in particular has a tendency to become dominant in Weber's thinking. What relationalism is likely to lead us to, in other words, is a categorization of different types of relation on the one hand and different levels of relation. There are 2 things: different types of relation, different forms of relations, and at the same time different levels of relation. Within a particular relation, you will find different levels of relation, and an account of society in terms of the interrelation of these different relations. So, this can clearly become very abstracted very rapidly, C. Wright Mills, the way we have adopted his method of the sociological imagination, his C. Wright Mills discussion on the problems of grand theory is very relevant here. Okay. So relational approaches tend towards this kind of categorization, but they also tend to privilege intellectual consistency over empirical usefulness. In other words, because our description of different types of social relation is likely to be quite an abstracted one, if it is to be much use in telling us things that we do not already know, it will be a highly intellectual account. As we generate more of these concepts describing types and levels of relations, we are going to wish to make them as consistent as possible with each other for very valid intellectual reasons. For equally valid reasons, we are likely to wish to be able to generate all of them from as restricted a number of basic concepts as possible. In other words, to generate typologies of possible variations and interrelations of particular types of relations. Okay. These types and levels of relations, types of relations as well as levels of relation, okay, there must be consistency, and we must attempt to generate typologies of possible variations and interrelations of particular types of relations. Okay. The net effect of all this is that relational approaches have a tendency towards what we can properly describe as structuralist accounts. That is, in other words, accounts which derive all of social reality from the operation and permutation of a limited number of basic concepts. Ideally, this number can be reduced to only one. Okay. Okay. That is relationalism. Okay. Because this core concept from which our description of society is generated is a highly intellectual one. This is very likely to produce a form of philosophical idealism. What is that philosophical idealism? That is a theory, that is a method which treats the social world as generated from ideas, and in this case from a single idea, because it can be reduced to, ideally this number can be reduced to 1. In this sense, this core concept, okay, which is very likely to produce a form of philosophical idealism, it is a theory or a method which treats the social world as generated from ideas, and in this case from a single idea. While there are dramatic differences in the content, the structure of our account of society is likely to be very similar whatever idea we start from. In some ways, Althusser account, not of actual modes of production, but of the idea of modes of production, and Lévi-Strauss's account of culture oriented around difference produce quite similar ways of thinking. Okay. Why what Althusser tried to look at, that it is not the actual mode of production that we talk about in the context of modernity, in the context of capitalism, okay. But actually we are talking about the idea of mode of production. We are not talking about modernity as such, but actual modernity, but we are talking about the idea of modernity, what we can envision modernity, how we can envision modernity, how we have tried to encapsulate capitalism. We do not know what actually capitalism is all about, okay. That idea, okay. Okay. That is why, while I mean the structure of our account of society is likely to be very similar whatever idea we start from. In some ways Althusser's account not of actual modes of production, but of the idea of modes of production, and Lévi-Strauss's account of culture oriented to a difference produce quite similar ways of thinking. I mean, to finish with this general account, it has to be said that Lévi-Strauss's account privileges this approach rather more visibly, and it is worth mentioning something briefly about what it is. Essentially, Lévi-Strauss performs two operations in his account of human culture. On the one hand, Lévi-Strauss employs a linguistic analogy to treat culture not just as a system of relations, but as a system of symbolic relations such as myths. And on the other hand, using the same linguistic analogy, Lévi-Strauss aims at a purely formal description of the various elements involved in particular myths. Particular system of symbolic relations, such as myths. In other words, Lévi-Strauss sets out to describe structure, but not the content. What this leads to an argument that there is an objective meaning in human culture, which is other than the subjective meaning. What this leads to is an argument that is an objective meaning in human culture, which is revealed by structure and which is other than the subjective meaning which is revealed by content. Okay? Objective meaning in human culture is revealed by structure, whereas subjective meaning in human culture is revealed by content. And what Lévi-Strauss was more interested in, Lévi-Strauss was interested in the objective meaning of human culture as revealed by structure. That is why what we just now discussed, that using the same linguistic analogy, Lévi-Strauss aims at a purely formal description of the various elements involved in these systems of symbolic relations, namely myths. In other words, Lévi-Strauss sets out to describe structure, but not the content. Okay. Since, however, this objective meaning cannot be straightforwardly shown to be present in a particular myth, once we bracket any question of the way people say they understand it or the context that they tell it in, it has to be situated within the unconscious. In other words, from a description of social relations, we move to a description of the nature of the human psyche. Okay. To complete this account, what Lévi-Strauss claims to be the central feature of the human unconscious, a claim which he believes to be backed up by linguistics, is naturally enough identical with the concept that Lévi-Strauss uses to analyze the objective meaning of the form of myths. This distinction is that of difference or distinction. For Lévi-Strauss, then, the end of the intellectual journey is a description of the social and in particular cultural world as a reflection of the supposed tendency of the human brain to divide things up. Okay. Now, what we have discussed in this lecture today, very quickly we will see. We started with the structuralist interpretation of modernity and how the works of Lévi-Strauss and Louis Althusser have contributed immensely to the debates on modernity, and these four parameters, these four central philosophical and political foundations of modernity we try to examine through their works, through the works of Lévi-Strauss and Althusser. We gave a prefatory remark about the structuralist interpretation, how structuralism, I mean there is an intersection between structuralism on the one hand and positivism and functionalism on the other, which has led the works of which is highlighted in the works of Auguste Comte and Emile Durkheim, and which leads on to the works of Pearsonian structural functionalism. And in holism or totality, we have discussed relationalism and the death of the subject, okay, and we have discussed difference. Okay. In the next lecture, we are going to complete two more very important aspects within holism or totality, okay. I mean namely functionalism and modernity. Okay. Thank you.